Hello and welcome to the Product Opscast with Graham Reed and Antonia Landy. Hello, Antonia. Again for the second time this week. How are you doing?
Still very well, Graham. Lovely to be here.
Fabulous. Today we are joined by my very good friend Jake Brereton, COO at Launch Notes and Atlassian alumni. He's also the co-author of our Product Ops Playbook, which we published last year. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Congrats on the new podcast and thrilled to be here.
Fabulous. Do you want to take just a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and a little bit about your history?
Yeah, of course. Name is Jake Brereton, and as Graham said, the co-founder and COO of Launch Notes. But prior to that, spent about 7 years at Atlassian and had a stellar run there from 2013 to 2020. And then met my co-founder. And as the saying goes, you should always, you're going to go start a company, go solve a problem that you have felt. And so we felt the pain of product communication, which Launch Notes is a product communication platform with the goal being to keep the technical and non-technical sides of businesses in sync, aligned at the service of all of your end users. Because if your customer facing teams, your success, your support, your marketing teams aren't intimately aligned with what's happening in the product and engineering side of the org, that friction is not only just painful, but can have a very real and clear impact on ROI and bottom line and top line and all those things, which are topics that we explore in great length in our Product Ops Playbook. It's a completely free download. We'd love for you to go read it, download it, and give us your thoughts and feedback.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that a little bit later on some of the key points that are covered in that book, because our theme for today is on and around communication. For product ops as a whole, it's such an important piece, and in fact, in the book that we wrote, it was the underlying piece of all of the product ops pillars. And certainly for Antonio and I, this is something that we talk about so much on this show as well, about good communication and how we achieve that. So I think one of the things I think we'd really love to dive into is kind of what's your experience, with this, and kind of what would you started to allude to that in your background about the pain points that you were feeling at Atlassian, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. That drove you to kind of go away with Tyler and go and build Launch Notes. Let's walk through that. Let's talk a little bit more about what those pain points were.
Yeah, happy to. It's a great topic. So as I mentioned, I was at Atlassian from about 2013 to 2020. In that time, it went from about 800 people to 3,000. So anyone that's kind of lived the scale up experience and you've lived through some of those, you've got those war stories. And I worked on the Jira product line specifically. I led product marketing for Jira, which even within that business unit has multiple flavors of Jira. There's Jira and there's Jira Service Desk. And at the time there was Jira Software and Jira Core. And so that was one business unit. There were also, I think at the time I was there, 14 products across the entire Atlassian suite. And then you pile on top of that Atlassian was a very global and distributed company. So like half my team was in Australia. I was in San Francisco. We had folks in Austin. They spun up an office in India. Even trying to, and Jira had different pieces. Support was here, engineering was here, product was here, marketing was here. And so trying to understand at a granular level what was going to be reaching what users when became a very, very acute pain point, and one that sort of scaled linearly with the growth of the business. So the more the business grew and the team grew and the customer base grew, the more my team as the product marketing team, whose job it was to make a lot of noise about what was coming and use that to drive engagement and upsell and cross-sell and all these things. Just for us, keeping track of what was going to be rolling out when became a huge headache. And it led to this meeting that we finally started having. That was like a 2-hour meeting. It was every other week. For anyone that's been in product or product marketing, you probably know this meeting and you've been subjected to it. But and it was like I had a team of 10. So we had 10 product marketers in a room in San Francisco on a Zoom. And we had some PMs in Australia, and some PMs in India. And it would be literally 2 hours. And the PMs would just run through what they're working on. And everyone was sharing a slide deck and we were taking notes, and people would say what was shipping and what was not and what was likely to ship. And I remember one day specifically, and ironically, or this might have been the universe just bringing things together, because I was talking to Tyler about potentially leaving and working with him on Launch Notes. A PM in Sydney was demoing a feature that was a long-awaited and very sought-after feature for Jira admins, who are a very opinionated and passionate bunch. And this feature was being demoed sort of in real time. And it had already been, since the 2 weeks prior, it had already been designed, launched, and shipped. And your first reaction is, amazing. This is great. We're creating customer value. We're shipping things. But at the same time, it was a complete and total missed opportunity for our team, whose job it is to like make sure that all those admins know what's coming and why we did it. And here you go and here's how you turn it on, all the things that is basic product marketing. And so I remember just being furious and saying, I muted the call and I said, how did we let this happen? Like, this is a feature we've been waiting for several years. They just rolled it out. Who was on this, and it was no one's fault, but it's just, again, this is the complexity of a large scaling organization. So my co-founder, Tyler, he came from a product called Status Page. He was the founding engineer over there. And at the time, was Status Page, which Atlassian later acquired. And that's how I met him. But the entire philosophy around Status Page was during downtime, turn that into a moment to build trust and bring organizational transparency to the situation. Here's what's happened. Here's who's on it. Here's when you're going to receive an update about it. And so he'd been kind of kicking around the idea of what if we take that same concept and apply it to the product org. And I literally the same week, I think he and I had lunch and started talking about this. I just had that experience and I was irate. And I said, man, I get this. I've got an amazing team. I've got all the budget in the world. I've got great tools at my disposal. And my team can't keep track of what is rolling out when. If you're looking for someone to come work to solve this problem with you, I would love to do it. So he left in late 2019. I followed in early 2020. Seemed like a great time to leave your super cushy corporate job and jump off into the unknown. And then COVID hit. But the rest is history. So yeah, it was those pains, Graham, that and I again I've always felt them. I think every product and sort of surrounding teams feel that tension at times. But man, when you're scaling a company big time, especially with if you're remote, which most teams are these days, that gets really painful and really acute. And as I'll finish where I started. It's ultimately it's at the service of customers, and customers don't know you're doing them a disservice, and you're potentially losing potential ability to drive CSAT and revenue and all those metrics that matter for the business. So.
Yeah. So interesting to hear your story because, I have felt this in my bones. Honestly, a big part of nearly every product ops implementation is how does the product org speak to the rest of the org, right? And I've seen, at its worst, I've seen sales folks find new features during demos, which is, like you say, it's bad for your sales folks, but it's a bad experience for the customer because you could have sold to them better. It could have been more appropriate. Maybe it was something really exciting, right? Something really groundbreaking that they were waiting for. And on the flip side, you close that loop, it goes all the way to support. If you deliver something new, exciting, that everybody wants to use, and suddenly there are issues, but nobody knows how to provide support, or nobody knows, right, whether it is actually in a fit state to be demoed, whether this is something that support can handle, should handle, and so on. So it's a very visceral reaction I'm having to your story.
That's good. I like that. It's as you've alluded to. I mean, I think this is why there's such a great sort of connection between what we do and the product ops community, and just product ops as a role, and why we have such an affinity for it. But yeah, there was a great, to your point, Antonia, there was a great slide in our pitch deck when we went to raise our seed round. Tyler did about, I can't remember the number. I think it was like 70 interviews before he started building, just to make sure that this was something he was kind of over the right target. And we had a great quote from, I think she was the head of customer success or support at G2 at the time. Not a small place, pretty well known. And she said that she was hearing about new features from her customers. And she said, that completely erodes my ability to do my job, as well as the trust that customers have in me to be the authority on what's around. Like, if I'm hearing about it from my customers, that is just such a gut punch. And, I think so emblematic of the exact problem we were trying to.
Why do we feel that this is such a common thing, such a common problem for businesses, and even within those businesses that, we will assume for a moment that product managers and product teams will be, they are, whether dare I say, excuse on this matter is we haven't got the time. It's down on our priority list. We're focusing on delivery. We're focusing on everything else. Why is this? What is the underlying story here? Why do we think this is?
Yeah, I'd love to get your 2 cents on it as well. My take on it, Graham, is, and it's great. It's $1 million question. Even from my experience working with some of the best product managers and product management leaders in the industry. Different people might have different views on this, but I would say of all the people that take the crown of, or that are fighting over the crown of like the busiest role that is stretched the most thin in any organization, I think it's product management. You usually have one product manager for an entire team of people. They're managing that entire team of people. They're in charge of largely of like making sure that the design is right, making sure it's implemented, making sure that there's no scope creep, making sure it's shipped on time, that the QA process is that the fit and finish is there and it's not going to roll out and cause a bug. They're doing all of that while trying to plan the next sprint, making sure that they're meeting customer needs, having customer conversations and making sure that they're not just building a faster horse, and while all of a sudden always ensuring that the executives understand what they're delivering and the value that they're driving for the business. And so I think it's just a matter of that. And then there was no, prior to launch notes, there was no sort of dedicated way or tool to promote and broadcast what was happening in like a streamlined way with like workflows and directly into Slack channels and into email inboxes where people are actually living. And so usually the best you would get, again, there's no nefarious means. It's just the best you might get is a biweekly readout or some sort of Slack notification with bullet points, because it's like they're doing 50 other things. And by the time that something gets around to, okay, this is actually going to roll out, they're already on, they're 3 steps ahead, halfway through the next sprint kind of thing. And so I think from my experience, just what I've observed, that's largely it. They're just stretched like, microscopically thin. And oftentimes what ends up falling through the cracks are all the enablement stuff that is arguably, as we talk about in the product ops playbook, like the most important, because you just spent how many hours and how much money building this thing. You have to make sure that people are prepared to sell it, to support it, to market it, to engage with it for your end customers. But through no fault of their own, that often it just falls through the cracks.
The interesting thing is that I don't think I've ever seen a company that hasn't tried to solve this. I think that idea that this is something that has to happen and is at least important enough for us to try, I think that's there. I don't think that's where it's lacking. But more often than not, it's about flight level, it's about timeliness, and it's about accessibility, right? You mentioned it very briefly, Jake, right? Is it an email? Is it in Slack? Is it on Confluence somewhere? Where is this information actually stored so that the right people can access it at the right time in a shape that is useful to them? And I think that's what also really differentiates the product ops job from just implementing a framework or implementing some sort of solution that says, yeah, Google Doc, you get it in your inbox every 2 weeks. And it doesn't really question how people receive that content, whether it's findable, when they need it to prepare themselves to be able to do a good job, right? So it's all of these nuances that are getting lost. It's like, yeah, communication happens, but the way, shape, and form in which it happens, I think that's the nuance that gets lost.
Very, very interesting. And you've hit on both of you have hit on 2 really interesting points there. One is when, and we'll touch on that one first. And the second one is flight level. And we'll come back to that because that's a really, really key. And one I'm in particular very passionate about. But let's talk about when for a moment. And I suppose, is there the right understanding, not just within product, but actually across the business, when each team, each division needs to understand the next piece of the puzzle? And one thing that I've always tried to do is to kind of map this out, a little bit like a user journey, in understanding when, throughout the life cycle of a product, throughout the life cycle of development, when does each team need to be involved? And ergo, when does each team need to contribute, and when do they need to understand what's happening next? And I don't think that's necessarily very, very well understood.
I also think it's different for every team, depending on the size of the org, right? That's another sort of layer of complexity. I think everything you said is spot on. Different teams need things at different times with sort of different levels of granularity. But that changes. And I know this because we have hundreds of customers, and I get to work with a lot of them intimately, and it's like every rollout is a little different, and they come to us looking for best practices. And of course, we have a lot of sort of guardrails, and we say, this is sort of how our frameworks, this is how you should think about it. But ultimately, it depends on what are your product rhythms. We need to fit into those. And then, so we're not, disrupting the apple cart. And then we need to start building out from there and going, okay, what other teams what's the most pressing need? What other teams need to be engaged? Okay, what is the timeline for them? Okay, how do we do this without overwhelming your product org and your product ops team? But it's spot on. The thing that one of the most successful companies that we have using launch notes, and I won't use their name because I just feel like this is their process they've built out, but they have they have their process so dialed. It is a beautiful thing to see. And what they rolled out is they call it the pre-release notes process. So they release notes and they have the pre-release notes. And the pre-release notes are basically the release notes, but broken down by audience. And they go out, I can't remember if it's 48 or 72 hours before any release goes out. So basically, and launch notes is built on a categorization system with the idea being that not all sort of change is created equal and people can subscribe to the change that's relevant to them. Because another whole problem that we're trying to solve here is like the signal to noise ratio. And if you're just blasting things out into Slack channels or emails, people immediately tune out because a lot of it's not relevant. They've got the categorization system built, and then 72 hours before a release happens, any release, an entire release note goes out. And there's a lot of overlap that in the release note, but it's more granular. There's some additional details. The marketing has gone in there and put their spin on it. And what it does is it not only just makes sure that everyone's aligned with like, okay, this is coming imminently, but it gives people time to ask questions, dig in further. On launch notes, there's lots of, there's the ability to link to things. So it's like the sales deck is right there, the enablement deck, the link to the draft of the help docs. It's all right there. And it gives people, and the owner of the project, it's like, if you have any questions, reach out to this person. And so, and they dialed that in years ago. They've been a customer for years, but it works like clockwork for them. And it's like, if that's, obviously they're a more mature team and this is something they've really invested in. But I look at them as kind of the standard bearer. It's like that is what every company should be doing. It's like you should have a pre-release workflow that is in tandem to your release workflow. And it is enabling everyone 48 to 72 hours at least before a release is going out. That gives them time to ask questions, dig in, fully understand it. And then by the time the release is going out, everyone's ready for it, knows exactly what it is, how it works, who it's applicable to, et cetera. Anyway, but your comment sort of triggered that thought. But that's the kind of place where I think most companies should be trying to, hopefully striving to get to really do their product and engineering org and everything that they're building justice with their customers.
Graham, I actually love that you mentioned you almost do it like a customer journey, because it's this piece of communication, this artifact in itself has jobs to be done, right? And every single segment, whether that be your end user, somebody in success or support, somebody in sales, somebody in marketing, somebody in a different engineering division, right? Depending on how big your company is and how big your product is, they all need different things from this type of communication, right? And we talked about flight levels already, but I think it's also just about the framing. Like if I am in a platform team, and we're about to launch an MVP or something that is going to be super intense on our platform for one reason or another, I need to know about this. I need to know about this in advance so that then I can act appropriately if and when something happens. So I think this idea of really looking at it from the user's perspective, the person who is receiving this piece of communication and what they need to do with it, right? I think that in itself can already help us get a little better at framing the communication.
And interestingly, and I think this actually nicely segues into kind of the next big piece, which is starting to talk about that flight level, about understanding what do those different customers, those different end users, those different audiences, what do they actually need to hear? What will they appreciate most? I've talked a huge amount in the past about kind of what I feel is being very audience led in kind of communications. What does the audience want and need to hear? Not what does product and engineering want to tell them? Because that's not always the same thing. In fact, it's very rarely the same thing. Understanding what it is that the audience will take away at those different points on that customer journey as well. So at what point do sales need to understand something, and what do they need to understand at that point, which is going to be very, very different to what the CEO needs to hear and the C-suite team. What do other engineering teams, what do the support teams need to understand? Do the support teams really need to understand that this is going to be super duper wonderful for you as a customer and end user so that you can now solve all of your problems? To be honest, probably not. What they need to understand is what are the things that they're going to call in for and what are going to be a problem. And similarly, sales on the other end of the stick, I don't care about all of those problems. They're out there to fundamentally sell the thing, and get more revenue, get more customers in the door, and sell it as best they possibly can. So those messages can be very, very different ultimately on that same release.
Yes.
And so it's something that you and I, we go into a bit of detail on the book about. And I know you've got a lot to say on this.
Yeah, I think it starts with, and we have templates in the product that speak to this, and then we encourage, again, we sort of give teams frameworks and say build on top of this. I think and you can keep me honest here, Graham, but the four that sort of always top of mind for me is what's changing, when is it changing, how am I impacted, or who's impacted, depending on who you're kind of speaking to, and like where do I go to learn more? It's kind of like those are the four basic things. And as you said, if you take those four things and take it to the CEO versus the sales folks versus the support folks, they're all going to have different things. But those are kind of the four with any change. In my mind, you start with those four things. And then you work backwards from there. It's like, okay, and if it's sales, then it might also be, in the who's impacted, it might be like, what customers are going to get this? What customers is this right for an upsell? If it's support, it might be, when is this happening? It's like, okay, when is this happening? But when is this rolling to staging so I can go play with it and click around so I'm aware of it? When are the help docs? But it's kind of like I feel like if you start with those four general areas, that becomes the starting point, and then you can build out with more granularity. And yeah, and usually for any executive, if you're just going up the food chain, it's just they care more about like, when is it happening? And then, there's kind of a auxiliary question of that of like, what's the success metric and when will we know? When can we call this a done deal and then do a retro report on it, which goes back to the PMs being so busy. Oftentimes that gets thrown out the window too. It's like, you never go back and go, hey, this thing that we just spent 2 months building and then we shipped it and then we marketed it, did it actually do anything? That's a conversation for a different day. But yes, if you start, I feel like with those four basic categories, then you can continue to break it down as many ways as you need in addition to that. But those are kind of the four I feel like are the key with any change. And you don't always get those. I mean, even the question of when is it releasing, right? If you ask, that's usually,
big question that is for most product teams.
Right. When you go to you say, hey, you're missing when is we actually getting this? All of a sudden there's no silence. You get silence on Slack. So yeah, those are the four that we usually say start with and then build out from there. And I've actually never heard the flight levels analogy before, but I like that. At what level? 10,000, 20,000, 40,000. I like that. We should start using that in the product.
You're welcome.
How does that resonate? Did I miss anything?
No.
Again, you guys are in there.
No, definitely. I think that's absolutely correct. The analogy, the framing that I quite often use with these things is actually, well, the three levels I go through is what's the problem? What was the problem? What is the solution? Why is this awesome? What's the value here?
Yeah.
Absolutely, as you said. And then the next stage is if you want more, here's more over here. And for me, what that does is as well is kind of helps anybody within the business, not so much from the different departments, but yes, absolutely. But also considering how long somebody has worked at the business for. So with that sort of framing, somebody can pick that up. And the same with your framing as well. Someone can pick that up generally, whether they have just walked in the door or they've been here 10 years and they know the product inside and out. Because actually that's another piece as well is, different parts of the business will have different interests, but different people will have different understandings of the product. Even you've been there, for most products, you've been there a year and you still don't know the product inside and out. You don't know every aspect of it. You don't know how to necessarily go and implement it with every single customer flawlessly and all their different nuances. You'll still find all these things out, and that's just natural. So how in our communications do we mitigate some of that? How do we help our colleagues around the business to learn more about the existing product, learn more about what's coming next, learn about what's the value, what's the aha moments, what's the awesomeness about our product that they maybe don't know already.
Yeah.
And Tony, would absolutely love to hear your views on this because you work with a lot of different clients, and implementing this sort of stuff.
Well,
I actually love, Jake, your questions. One thing that I'm missing, especially for internal communication, is sort of dragging the strategy, kicking and screaming into this with you, because I'm a big believer in relentlessly referencing your strategy in every single piece of communication. So this idea of, and it's similar to what you said, Graham, right? What's the problem? I think I would frame it in, why have we decided to do this? Why have we
Mm-hmm.
decided to focus on this? And it's also similar to your success criteria, Jake, right? Like, what do we expect to come out of this, right? Why did we, as a company, as an organization, decide to spend 2 weeks, a month, 3 months on releasing this specific feature? And what is it going to help us do in our organization if we've been successful? So I think that's the one addition I would make to this framing.
I love it. Yeah, it takes me back to my Atlassian days. At Atlassian, they had something, their sort of strategy framework they called the VTFM. I won't go into what the acronym fully means, but at the beginning of every town hall, which we did weekly as an entire company, they started every town hall with, here's the VTFM for
Yeah.
the year. And and each one had the 4 focus areas and the vision and whatever, and how everything laddered up. And then every presenter or everything that followed was very specifically tied to those different areas to reinforce exactly as you said, which I think is very important. Why are we doing this? Why are we all here? Why are we all bending over backwards to, working long hours to get all this stuff done for these customers at this time? And if you lose sight of the forest through the trees, it's an important thing to say. Maybe I should work that into our template in the product. I like that.
I'm interested, Tony, you mentioned kind of constantly referencing the strategy, referring back to the strategy. And when we spoke to Matt LeMay a couple of months ago, this is a big, big passion for him as well. Just love to hear a little bit more. I think our audience would love to hear a little bit more of that. What's the importance there of, we've done this, here was the problem, or actually sometimes I use opportunity, just as good. Here's what we've done, here's why it's awesome. But now let's talk about how and how has this worked into the grander plans, what we've done.
Yeah, honestly, for me, it touches on 2 very important things. It's follow through, right? It shows the organization that strategy isn't just something that lives and dies in a deck somewhere that you maybe hear about once a quarter, but you can largely ignore. It's that it's accountability throughout the entire hierarchy ladder, right? Saying, no, we as a company decided this is important and here's what we've done about it. But at the same time, I think it's storytelling, right? It's internal storytelling. It is that level of excitement as well of saying, hey, we identified this big, bold problem and this is what we did about it. We think it's going to be successful, right? And we think it's going to move these numbers, but now let's wait and see. And I think it's also just part of that transparency that we were talking about in the very beginning of being able to say, this is what we said we would do. This is what we ended up doing. And I can't count the number of times where people in an organization are looking at the release notes and going like, why are we focusing on this? We have so many bigger fish to fry, right? And the hope and the idea is that that doesn't happen. And if it does, there is a very open, honest, transparent conversation that happens about that. And we can all be part of that, not just the product team and not just commercial teams.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I deliberately asked you that because I think it's just so important to be constantly referencing back to the big plan. And really glad you said as well, to show that we have a plan, to show that we are following through on that plan. Products are not just picking things out of the air and we're going to work on that next. We're going to work on that. No. This is the plan we all agreed on, whether it's a quarterly plan or an annual plan or whatever. This is the plan, and this is where we are on that plan, and these are the things that we've done. And actually kind of then also sort of saying back, well, look, let's take a look back as well. How have we done with that? Yes, we had a plan, and we've executed on that plan, but did that plan materialize into anything? Were we successful? Has it moved the needle? Has it generated the revenue that we predicted? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's super important. Jake, any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, an interesting thing, that conversation we have when we're onboarding customers is if we, because large component of launch notes is a customizable change log that can be sort of internal focused or externally facing, depending on the team and the need, or you can have both. And a lot of customers will reach the point of like, do you want to bring over? Should we bring over everything that currently is living in, it's usually some corner of the support site, or basically, do you want us to migrate all of your historical data in or not? And that's something we offer to do, and it's, of course, it takes time and it's effort for our team. A lot of teams will say, no, we'll just want to start fresh. And I usually encourage them to do the opposite because in addition to all the things that I think you both have touched on, there's also just a sense of like real accomplishment. I mean, we just imported a backlog of a change log 2 weeks ago that went back to like 2020, and there were like 1,000 things in there. And it's also like it's a testament, as you said, to like look back just as a team and just celebrate and go, wow. You're always, especially when you're in the product org, you're always looking forward. You're always getting pulled to the next thing. There's always like more, this. There's the next sprint and the next planning cycle and the next whatever it is, strategy deck for the execs. And it's like, hey, let's take a second to look back at everything we've just done, because when you look at it like over a 6-month, 12-month period, it's amazing. So I think there's also just there's a component of like having one home for all your product change communication, like Launch Chance is a good place to also just go back and scroll through and celebrate and go, hey, what did we do this last? Not only how does it tie to the strategy, which is very important, but also let's just look at everything we accomplished. And when you look at it like that, in many cases, for a lot of teams, it is remarkably impressive.
I think that's there's a piece here, and Antonio, I know you like this as well. I recently hosted an offsite for the whole product engineering division at Helios, and one of the things that our CPO, VP of product now, and presented was, look, here is a list of all the major things. These weren't just like little features. It was all the major things that we have done since we last did one of these. It was about 5 months since we kind of last presented at this session. And there was like 42 odd big things that had been done. We asked the question, how many people in the room of about 100 knew about all of these things? Not a single hand went up. Actually, not even some of our leaders knew some of everything that went out the door. I think literally only our head of engineering, or VP of engineering, and our VP of product, knew every single one of these items. And it was a massive. Although that was a little bit surprising, it was a great opportunity to really celebrate. There were some big things that made some big impacts on our external customers. There were some big things that impacted our warehouse staff. There were some big things that nobody knew about, but were very infrastructure related, that basically stopped the whole thing falling on its arse several times, that were really, really important. So I really love that we can do this as well, that we can use these communications, not just to inform, but to celebrate what has been done, celebrate the hard work, celebrate the journey that the companies are on consistently.
A lot of blood, sweat, and tears.
This is so interesting. I feel like a thought is forming in real time. So we talked about pre-release notes, right? We talked about release notes. What if we could have post-release notes?
Post-release
notes. What if we could check back in 2 weeks or a month or, whatever makes sense for your product after something major has been released and said, this was our assumption. This is what we thought the numbers would look like. This is what they look like today. And we deciding this is good enough, or we're going to keep working on it, or actually, gonna kill it, did not achieve what we thought it would. That would be so interesting.
I love that. And we have a feature called Digests that allows you to roll up multiple things. And the way I see it used and the way we like market is sort of for like remarketing, because that's another issue with product marketing. It's like you launch stuff and you do all your activities, and then you if you're really doing your job right, you have a couple of trailing things that are webinars, and so you can kind of beat the drum multiple times. The idea of Digest is to be able to, at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, say, hey, here are the 3 or 4 things. You literally just click on the announcements, it rolls them into one email, and you can do la 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 at the top and send it out again, and it just gets it back in front. But I love the idea, and we're actually rethinking like how Digest work right now, and if they're really serving our customers, maybe we should rebrand it as like post-release notes. And it's
maybe
it's an opportunity, especially if you're using it for internal purposes, to celebrate and look back and say, did we achieve what we set out to achieve? Because it could be, the functionality is there for it to be used in exactly that way. I like that a lot.
Antonio lists her consultancy fees on her website. Don't worry.
First one's free.
Yeah, first one's free.
Fantastic. I'll take it and run.
What are some of the major pitfalls if we're not getting our communications right? We touched upon it at the start, and Jake, you touched upon it certainly with the headaches that you were experiencing at Atlassian. But what are some of the major things that this might seem quite obvious to many people, but what are the risks that we have if we don't get decent communications out the door, or for some teams, any communications out the door?
I think there's a long list. I think I'll go right to the one that probably most executives care about in 2025, as we are all dealing with like very lean, efficient organizations. And that's missed opportunities for expansion, upsell, retention. We have a customer story on our site with Cvent is a customer of ours, and went to visit them on site. And I got to talk to a number of different people, both that were kind of on the publishing side as well as the receiving side, which was very cool. And one of them was the VP of enterprise sales. And he told a story about the fact that their sales team loves launch notes and they're all subscribed and they wait with bated breath. And they know as soon as something comes, they can, again, they got all the information they need. They're cleared to talk about it, sell it, whatever. And he tells a story, a very specific story that he said was recent, where he was on site visiting a customer. And these are large customers, they're paying six figures. And this customer, he was doing his quarterly visit with them and kind of check in. And this customer had been waiting on a specific module that they've been working on. And literally, as he was walking into the meeting on his phone, he got the email that said, "This is imminent. You can now talk about it." And he was able to, it was kind of towards the end of the quarter, and he was able to, in that call, or not in that call, excuse me, in that meeting in person, sell that customer on something that, one, they've been waiting for. So it was a delayer moment for them. But two, for sales folks and for the business and the top line and bottom line, like, you got to grow and you got to sell. And so alignment with your sales folks and the people that are the ones actually out there, doing the hardest job of all, which is selling. If they know what is there, what they're allowed to talk about, exactly how to talk about it, and they have that, they're getting it in real time from your product org with confidence, like, hey, this is who it impacts. And then he was like, I was able to literally talk them through how it was going to work. It had screenshots in it and the docs. And it was like, I could talk them through when we were going to roll it out and how it was going to impact their thing and what it was going to cost. So I think there's a lot of, communication is kind of the pillar of all relationships. And we see business and its customers a very important relationship, as hopefully most companies do. But for sales folks specifically, who are tasked with selling and upselling and retaining customers and keeping them happy and growing, you're straight up missing revenue opportunities. I mean, if he had not gotten that launch note notification, he walked in that meeting, great, they might have renewed. They would not have expanded to the tune of 5 figures, and he would have left the meeting and not gotten a larger commission, and the company would not have collected, I forget what it was, $40,000-$50,000. I would say that's the biggest one. We could, there's a whole chapter on this in the book. We could go on, but I think that's the biggest one. You're missing, you just spent how long building it, and you gotta go sell it. And the people that are out on the front line selling need to know what they can talk about and when, and get their customers excited about it. So that would be the first one I would go to.
Yeah, I think my head was going exactly the same direction. And I think that's why I find this specific topic so exciting, because a lot of the time in product ops, we're like, oh, better communication, oh, increased collaboration. And it always feels kind of fuzzy. It's always like, okay,
Yes.
that's cool, but is that a must have? Like, it's nice if everybody knows what's going on and everybody is involved, but like, how much time do we really need to spend on this? But like, you are leaving money on the table, right?
Yes.
You are not gaining new customers. You might be losing the customers that you do have because you're doing a bad job of supporting them. Like, this is concrete. This goes straight to the top line and to the bottom line. And it is nevertheless communication work. It nevertheless requires some level of tooling and operations, and it is all of these fuzzy things, but it is also incredibly vital to the business, to the actual company itself.
And I think there's an interesting thing here as well, because I've had this conversation a number of times with a number of people who will push back a little bit. We are talking here, and we would tend to think of communications as, hey, look, we will write something down and we will tell either internal colleagues or external customers, this is what we have done. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. That's all fine. There are certainly parts of the SaaS world, e-commerce in particular, whereby actually, look, we don't need to be communicating with the product should be communicating everything that we're doing and that we have, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we could debate that to death for a moment, but okay, let's leave that for the moment. But you've still got your internal colleagues that still need to know this stuff. This assumption that actually the product, should be so intuitive and so easy at all times, regardless of what you've built, whether you're building something brand new, even Amazon, when they go off into a new venture, Absolutely, they will not be saying, well, actually, do you know what? It's so perfect that anybody in the entire business of 100,000 odd people that we've got should just be able to pick it up, regardless of what it is. If we've just invented AWS, oh yeah, our salespeople should be able to pick that up. That's easy to do. No, it's not the case at all. I think that there are lots of examples whereby that good communication, whether it's written, whether it's verbal, whether it's video, is super important, particularly for your internal staff.
I would agree. I would violently agree. And I would also say the best product managers, I believe, they've got to have a lot of great skills. One of the most important, if not the most important, is the ability to clearly communicate to customers, communicate to their engineering team, communicate to executives, communicate to the rest of the business, what's happening, kind of all at the right granularity. But again, I've had the privilege and pleasure of working with a lot of great PMs, and the ones that are just got it, like they know how to communicate, and they're not afraid to communicate more than once, right? They understand that like you got to get it through. People have thick heads, they're busy, they're multitasking, and so it's like, you hear them like repeating it over and over and over again. This is why we're building this feature. This is what it is. I've found that to be a common thread. So yeah, very much agree, Graham.
Antonio, any thoughts?
No, I totally agree. I mean, listen, I very frequently and publicly credit my English degree with my success in product. Honestly, I think the fact that I came into tech knowing how to communicate abstract and complicated concept for many different audiences, it's what has helped me be really effective in many different contexts. And so I couldn't agree more. Absolutely on the same page. I think communication is such a core skill and a core part of what we do day in and day out, right? And I love that you mentioned this relentlessness, right? Like once people are going, Jesus, I'm so sick of you talking about this, that's when I know it has landed.
It's gotten through.
That's when I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's I think that's actually quite a great place for us to start to close this conversation down. There is, and ironically, I think Antonio, I think you've kind of just alluded to that as well. Is that I think communication is one of those things that I know I certainly talk about it a lot at work, on this podcast, etc., and people will almost be kind of bored to death of me talking about how important it is, us talking about how important this is, but it is so fundamental to how we operate. It's not just actually for product managers. It's not just for product teams. It's everybody. Communication is fundamental to life. Communication is fundamental to the running of a business. Communicating from one person to another, what we're doing, what we're working on, what our targets are, what our sales figures are, how we perform, what customers are we going after next? Are we being successful in what we're doing in the business? And I feel that in an age whereby we are trying to automate so much, we're trying to throw AI at so much, is there the potential that we're going to start losing some of that good storytelling skills? It's not to say that the output is not going to be still a thing, because LLMs and AI is doing a pretty good job at trying to do that. But are we going to start to rely too much on that and start to lose some of that storytelling from the people that need to be telling those best stories, which are product managers?
You want my take?
Go for it.
Go for
absolutely.
We have, this is of course a topic that's top of mind, as is all AI right now. But I think it's a great question, Graham. Our sort of take on it, we have as you might imagine, an AI generator in the product, and you can dump PRDs and strategy, whatever else, and then also give it a prompt and say, please draft something for me. But the way that we talk to customers about it, and sales and prospects and even current customers, is it will never replace the job of a PMM or product manager. What we want that AI to do is we want it to do the first 80%. We saw what I called like the blinking cursor problem. Like everyone hates opening a new Google Doc or a new document and just it's blank and you just got a blinking cursor and you're like, I got to go start somewhere, right? That's always the hardest part. If AI can give you something to edit versus something to write, and it can take all the information and it's really good at that, chew through it, and it can even look at your strategy deck and go, okay, I'm gonna put a bent on this for how it ties to the strategy. We say that last 20%, which is, you could argue, it's like the most important of any project, regardless of what you're doing. That last 20% is when a human's going to come in, and we're launching a new feature today. So yesterday I was doing this, and then I spent an hour or two last night putting in the screenshots, making sure that didn't hallucinate anything, tying it to some of the philosophical things that we believe as a company that AI is not going to pick up on, but really turning it from good to great. And I think PMs and PMMs are always going to be there. There will always be that need, or at least for the foreseeable future, to put a human touch on it. I think where AI can play a really valuable role is, again, getting you to the point where you can spend that hour or two really crafting it and honing it in, versus chasing up the 4 or 5 people you need. And is this all right? All the stuff that most product marketers are all too familiar with doing. So anyway, that's my take on how AI sort of fits into this. I hope, and it's our, I think, strong opinion that no, it will not replace that. It still needs, the way we think about it is like AI directed versus driven. So always talk about AI driven this, AI driven that. I think about it in the same way. We had the same conversation 10 years ago with data driven versus data informed, right? We need to be data driven. It's like, well, if you actually understand how data is used, you can tell any story with data, and you can actually data driven. You can drive yourself right off a cliff. Like it's not a way to run a business. You want to be data informed. Those should be data points you're taking in, and it takes a seasoned person to come in and make sense of that, tie it to the strategy, and figure out what to do. I think the same thing applies to AI. It's like, you don't want to be AI driven. You want it to be directed, and it's directed by a human who understands the full context and understands the customers and all that. So there's my hot take on AI and product management.
No, I am so aligned, right? I always tend to say, like, you can't edit a blank page, right? And for that, AI is
100%.
fantastic, right? And I think a lot of the time, even in my own sort of writing, I use AI so that I have something to argue against and go like, well, that's wrong. I would do that differently, right? And in that way, that's where the speeding up comes from. It's not from it giving you a pre-chewed thing that nobody ever looks at and is just sort of launched into the ether so that somebody else's AI note taker can then further summarize it for you. But I think it's that you can't generate excitement or storytelling or why you specifically in this company as a salesperson should care about this, right? It can get you a certain way to a certain place, but this idea that communication can be completely externalized, and given my background, I might be a bit biased here, of course, but I think that's the wrong way to think about it, right? So I love finding ways of getting from 0 to 1 faster. But I do think for that last stretch, that's, like you say, Jake, that's the most important part, right? That's what we still need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, there's a saying that one of the engineers I used to work with at Atlassian used to say that's always stuck with me, which is that for most engineering projects, the last 10% ends up being the 90%, right? Because the devil's always in the details. And I think that actually applies to most things. It's like that you can get 80, 90%. It's that last 10% that matters, regardless of what it is.
I think that's absolutely fantastic place to end on, absolutely. And then we are absolutely out of time. Antonio, that what you said there is that you can't generate excitement. AI can't generate excitement. It can't generate stories. It can't generate mystery. It can't generate anticipation. No, that is absolutely still human, still at the moment, at least anyway, human crafted. That's a key skill for product managers as well, is to get our customers and our internal staff excited and anticipating, to want to kind of find out more and want to buy those products. We are absolutely out of time. I would absolutely love to thank my friend and special guest, Jay Brereton, for everything that you have shared today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was a treat. And yeah, let's do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. And do please connect with any of us on LinkedIn. We have shamelessly plugged the Product Ops Playbook a little bit today, and there'll be a little link here somewhere on the spiel for the release. It's free to download, so just go and read it. It's all fantastic. And thank you for everybody to listening to us today. Antonio and I look forward to welcoming you on that new episode of the Product Opscast. Thank you.